Hi guys, what's going on, and welcome back to another episode of Total War Arena. So today we are taking a bit of a first look at the Tier 8 Carthaginian premium unit, Hamilcars Veterans. So obviously these are Hamilcar the General obviously, and these are supposedly his veteran troops, introduced as a Tier 8 premium unit. So I'm playing these on the Super Test server, so there might still be some changes before they're released when patch 3.1 goes live, but I think this is probably a fair representation of how they're going to be in the game. And so far I've actually been quite enjoying them. So let's take a bit of a dig down into the stats, see how they compare probably to their main equivalent, which would be the Roman Tier 8 Infantry. So they have pretty solid all-round stats. Their aggression, they get pretty good melee attack. At 126, I'm running them with 2 Consumables, bear in mind, but I'm assuming most people will do that as well, particularly given that they are a premium unit, so they get a good amount of credit income. They have 253 weapon damage and a solid weapon penetration, actually of 33 once they've got the Consumables running, which is pretty nice. Body armor as well, pretty good, 158. Where they do seem to fall down a little bit, from my opinion, is the mobility. That base movement speed of only 3.7. is pretty low, and it really means you've really got to run them with Hannibal. Obviously Force March gives a 19% boost to movement speed, which is nice. I mean, that makes them then playable, it takes them up to sort of mid-4s in terms of the movement speed, so yeah, they become quite nice then. But if you were using them with Hasdrubal, not that you particularly would, is more of a cavalry commander, but I think they would struggle with the mobility with Hasdrubal. And they do feel slow, even movement speed aside. Their acceleration is slow, their turn speed, well, it's actually quite high here, but they feel quite sluggish to control when they're on the battlefield. So, yeah, that's probably their biggest letdown, in my opinion, is their mobility. Obviously, you get the full range of classic Carthaginian consumables. I'm just running down payment, which gives the weapon penetration, body armor, and morale, and the Anatha Blessing, which is the melee attack, basically increased weapon damage. So their abilities, you get a classic Vicious Strikes, which obviously following the 3.1 update has been improved to give knockback as well. It's quite a nice little ability, and it's also got quite a nice animation now that goes with it. They get Javelins, they get 3 use of Javelins, and the Javelins seem to do a reasonable amount of damage, even against some higher tier 10 units, as we'll see in the later battle. So yeah, they're a nice little addition. It's also nice to get 3 over the sort of classic 2 that you tend to get with the Romans. And they obviously have formed combat. Exactly the same as the Romans, and that works in the same way as it has previously. So how does that balance up to their main competitor, which is obviously the Roman infantry? So we'll go and pop over to Germanicus and the Socii Extraordinaire. Obviously there's 2, we've got the Eagle cohort, which is sort of the more heavily armoured, slower Romans, but really I always felt the Carthaginian infantry was supposed to be sort of more of a flanking and more of a support force, so that's more equivalent to these type of Romans I felt than the heavily armoured ones, so it's these that we're going to be looking at. And first things first, these guys do not look as cool as those Carthaginians. Hamilcars Veterans look absolutely awesome. But in terms of statistic wise, they're actually very similar. The Romans, as you can see here, the melee attack is obviously very similar to the 126 that the Carthaginians have, and while the Romans get very slightly more melee weapon damage, it's insignificantly different. It's basically the same. Actually get notably less weapon penetration, so these guys will struggle a little bit more against things like elephants, even with the recent armor debuff that the elephants are undergoing. In terms of body armor, the Romans win out slightly, which is kind of understandable. That gives them, they're slightly more tanky, have a slightly higher overall defense value, and they do have a higher base movement speed, 3.8, which gets a +2 once you've got some of the equipment upgraded, which I believe is these. Oh no, not that one. It's the body armor, which gives a slight increase to movement speed. So these guys are probably a little slower than the Carthaginians when Force March is activated, but are generally not that slow, and you're not really going to be able to get away from them particularly quickly. That means it's going to be quite tough to actually escape Vengeance. Once activated, if Germanicus is using Vengeance, then it's going to be a tough one to escape from. Obviously these get Vicious Strikes exactly the same as the Carthaginians. They get the Javelins, although they only get 2 of them, the Peelers, but they work basically the same, and obviously naturally formed combat, and they reform automatically because they are a disciplined sort of professional unit. So let's hop into a replay with the Carthaginians and see how we sort of get on with these guys. Got to bear in mind, obviously we're on the Super Test server, so there's not all that many people on, so the matchmaking range is a little bit screwed up, I guess. But it gives quite a good indication of how these guys play, and it's quite nice sometimes to play against higher tier units and see how they perform. So I shall see you all in the battle. So we are loading into battle in the Battle of, I think it's Augustus Passage, this map, isn't it? So yeah, I really like the look of these guys. I think they look absolutely awesome. Particularly they've got all their lion pelts and good shields. And yeah, really cool looking premium unit. So first things first, I'll just get the Force March activated. We are on a road with the bulk of the unit, so what does that take us to? 4.75 on the road. 4.95 we get up to there, which is quite nice. Gives it a pretty decent amount of mobility. And they also get the increased melee attack and defense on the road like the Romans do. So that's a nice, good thing to know. So yeah, so they get up a pretty decent mobility. You know, they're moving quicker. These are quicker than the Romans will ever realistically be able to get unless they're using heavy charge. So I think probably a good addition to the opening game. So I just move up. As I say, a bit of a mix of matchmaking. We've got some tier 6 spears here, but then the bulk of our team and the enemy team are composed of tier 10s, since everyone one of the super testers wants to play tier 10. And some seriously badass war elephant going on over there. The amount of exotic creatures that have been killed to make this saddle. Shocking. Yeah, so I'm just moving down and moving to the long grass, and notice these Legatus cavalry going straight for our archers, so I rush back. Using obviously the speed from our forced march, enables us to get a bit of good 4.54 meters a second cross country, which is not too bad, and we make use of our javelins, which actually, you know, we do sort of about 5,000 damage to a tier 10 unit. Actually pretty good considering we get 3 throws, and that was actually only 2 of the units throwing. So yeah, I was quite impressed with the javelins for tier 8. Pretty decent amount of damage you can do. So I engage a few of the Roman cavalry at the back and send the other 2 units round to try and get in a bit more, see what we can do to start killing these guys and help our archers a little bit. Obviously with Hannibal, and the unit has no heavy infantry charge or any form of charge, which is a little bit disappointing. Makes it kind of hard to get stuck into combat sometimes, quite the same. You kind of have to run into your enemy unit before you get stuck in. But we still do enough to rout some of these Roman cavalry. And as we start to push into them, we start to accrue up a reasonable amount of damage. Obviously these guys have the equivalent weapon damage to the Roman infantry, so you know, it's not something to really worry about. But behind us we get some of these tier 10 companion elites, controlled by Galzag, which is a name that sounds vaguely familiar. So yeah, so he immediately activates his Ad Portus, also using a Hannibal commander, and obviously these are tier 10 troops, so quite dangerous to us. Thankfully our tier 6 hoplites turn around and immediately begin to face them off, and actually do quite a good job of holding the line there. And then we get some more companion elites coming in as well, and that leaves me an opportunity to start to flank the rear of the Galzag here. So I throw my javelins in, good 3,000 damage to the back of a tier 10 heavy infantry unit. You know, that is a good amount of damage. So I get stuck in, I get my determination, my Ad Portus activated, and I use Vicious Strikes. It was probably an error to use Vicious Strikes quite so early on. But we actually, considering we're fighting off a tier 10 unit, we are holding our own reasonably well, I felt. You know, these guys obviously have better stats than us, and using Ad Portus they have an immense amount of weapon damage, but our units aren't losing particularly drastically. I also send our other 2 units round to assist attacking these guys over here. Yeah, and then you see that was a use of Vicious Strikes there, where you get that knockback at the same time, which seems to be working really well. Just turn the sound down a little bit, I'm absolutely deafening myself. So yeah, and then we actually get these guys to rout, and we can show how quickly these guys can cut them down. Once they've got that Ad Portus activated, it's ruthlessly effective. And then these guys, we're still getting a lot of damage against them, even fighting through our hoplites. Obviously the new friendly fire change mechanics means that spearmen no longer do damage to allied units, which is a nice little change to the game there. So we can push through, and while we are taking a lot of damage, you know, we are fighting a tier 10, which is well into its 2nd stage of Ad Portus, you know, doing 250% melee weapon damage increase. So, you know, I think we're doing, these guys are holding their own considering they're 2 tiers lower and fighting, you know, a unit in its using its ultimate ability. So I felt that, yeah, pretty solid unit all in all, particularly when it gets involved in that sort of combat. So those guys get finished off, we cut quite a bit of damage as they rout. And that's been quite a nice start to the game, I felt, considering I'm, you know, really lower down compared to most of the other enemy units. Although our hoplites did a very good job as well with these Thurios spearmen. So I get my forced march back activated. These guys really struggle in forests. You see, minus 30% movement speed because they have low mobility. They fall into the absolutely lowest category in terms of forest debuffs. So they really suffer in terms of their movement speed in the forests. So that's something you really do have to bear in mind. Just don't get in the forest. Keep out of forests because you will suffer not only movement speed but you also melee defense and attack penalties. And you know, it's going to be fairly brutal on you all in all. So I'll begin to move in to try and maybe support the base cap, but we start to take quite a lot of fire from enemy artillery and from the enemy javelins as well, which are coming up on here. Enemy light artillery, I think some tier 10 light artillery, which is absolutely ripping us to pieces. So I try and advance up. And maybe in hindsight it would have been better for me to push right up against this wall and just try and go for the cap. Actually, looking at this, it would have almost certainly won us the game, so that was a terrible play on my part. But instead I push out. And unfortunately, we basically just get cut to pieces here. Oh, we ended up winning on the base cap in the end, so it didn't really matter. But yes, I got absolutely cut to pieces by those enemy artillery and that light artillery. So yeah, they don't fare so well against those sort of units. But all in all, I felt they performed really well, and I was pretty pleased with how they went. Yeah, so I feel all in all, I can recommend these as a premium unit to get. Assuming there's no major changes between this super test patch of 3.1 and when they're actually released in the game, they seem to hold their own quite well. And obviously you get the plus 50% free XP, unit XP and silver when you win a battle, and there's obviously no equipment to research. It doesn't look like there's any cosmetic effects either. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about these guys. Do you think you're going to be getting them? I'm certainly considering getting them in the main game. They're very enjoyable, really like them, good solid overall unit. So, thanks for watching guys, give the video a like, let me know what you think, and I shall see you all on the next episode.